Last week we started a series called The Table, and this is the actual table